When Peter first noticed the strange holes in his thumb, he freaked out completely. He had no idea what could have possibly caused this or how potentially dangerous this was. But he soon learns. He went to the doctor that very afternoon, but when that man took a look at it, the message for Peter was not good. The doctor called the police immediately after determining what was going on. Peter was just left without any explanation. The doctor had done some tests on him, and after seeing the results he immediately informed the police and ran out of the room, leaving him behind. Peter was starting to panic now as he now felt how serious this probably was. And when he found out that the doctor had locked the door on him, Peter started to see red. He started banging against the door with his full weight, trying to break it open. And with a couple of hits, it gave way. He was now facing to face with the doctors that had locked him in. The doctor was now forced to give Peter an explanation as to what he had discovered, and upon hearing it, Peter collapsed onto the floor. What were these holes in Peter's fingers, and why did the police need to get involved here? Before we go on, like this video, smash the subscribe button and click the notification bell. Let's proceed with the video. Peter didn't notice anything wrong when he woke up. It seemed like any other morning. He had gotten up and shuffled to the kitchen to make his coffee. He didn't even notice anything wrong while he made the coffee until he was about to pour it into his cup when he saw it and he was ready to scream. 40-year-old Peter was a single man. He had dated in the past, but it had just never gone well. He hoped that this time it would be different. He'd spent a lot of time preparing for the date. He really wanted it to go well, and it would be the first time they'd meet in person, but not everything would go to plan. He'd met the woman online and knew it was a long shot, but he met up with her. The date was nothing extraordinary. She really didn't seem that interested, and he wasn't sure yet if he wanted to see her again, but the next morning he was sure he didn't. After all, what was beyond strange? He didn't want to pull her into it when he didn't even know what was going on. Peter discovered that there was something strange about his thumb. It ached a bit, but it wasn't until he looked closely at it that he saw exactly why his thumb was hurting, and it scared the living daylights out of him. What was happening to him? Peter's thumb was covered in tiny holes. He thought that maybe something had stuck to his thumb, but bringing it closer to him, he saw that the holes were digging into his skin. He pressed on it with his other fingers, and it hurt a bit more. Something was very clearly wrong, but what? Peter's thought a bit. Maybe some insect had bitten him or even crawled into him? Maybe it had latched onto his thumb in the night? But he'd never seen a bug do anything like this. Peter searched online and came to the conclusion that no bug had done this. It had to be something worse. The more Peter looked at his thumb, the more confused he became. These weren't just tiny holes. There was something inside the holes. He couldn't make it out, but he was sure there was something else there. The holes were hard, and whatever inside was too. He needed to do something, and he had just the idea. Peter decided that he was going to try and dig out whatever it was in his thumb with tweezers. He went to the bathroom and pulled out his tweezers, but before he could dig into his thumb, he hesitated. He didn't really have any idea what he was dealing with. Doing this could make it even worse, but he still had to do something. Peter didn't like doctors. He preferred to take care of things by himself. He rarely would go unless something was severely bad, and as much as he hated the idea of going to the doctor, he knew that this wasn't something he should take care of by himself. So he took the leap and called the doctor. The doctor's office set up a semi-emergency appointment for that same afternoon. They told him that there would be others ahead of him, but they would definitely see him by the end of the day at the latest. In the meantime, the doctor told Peter that he needed to do something for him. The doctor told Peter that he needed to think about anything that was different recently that could have caused this. Anything out of the ordinary. It would greatly help the doctor figure out what exactly was wrong. Peter agreed to think about it and hung up the phone. What could have done this? He didn't really know. Peter thought back over the last week. He hadn't really done anything too out of the ordinary. He went on a hike through the forest a couple days ago. He easily could have touched something out there before. Maybe a mushroom or a contaminated piece of moss? That could definitely be an option, maybe.
As Peter continued thinking, the hike didn't make that much sense.
Surely other people had gone hiking on that same trail.
It was a popular route. He wouldn't be the first person to be experiencing this. There'd have to be other signs.
He decided to rule it out as an answer, but there had to be something else. It was difficult to think of anything that was out of routine. Peter was an average guy.
He didn't do much except hike occasionally and go to the local coffee shop. He worked from home and didn't go outside that much.
He really was a boring person, but then it hit him. There was something else that was out of the ordinary. Peter had gone on the date the night before. He'd been talking with the woman online for a while and had eventually decided to go on a date. Peter had been excited to try out dating again. He still hadn't found his soulmate and was hoping that this date would go well. Things would end up taking an unexpected turn. From the moment the date began, Peter felt like something was off about the woman.
She didn't really seem interested in him.
It was almost like she despised him, but as soon as he would start thinking this, she'd do something that showed that she was invested. It was just a strange date, but there was something more. Thinking back, Peter wasn't sure why she'd even contacted him in the first place. Looking through his messages with her, he could see more and more that she didn't really like him.
He'd just been a bit desperate and wasn't thinking clearly. Could she have something to do with all of this? Peter couldn't see how she'd have anything to do with this.
They hadn't gotten physical at all, and he hadn't contacted her since last night. She hadn't messaged him either.
If she had done something, wouldn't she have said something?
Peter wasn't sure, but it was time for his appointment. He had to go. Peter had no clue what was going on with his thumb when he left for his appointment. He continued to think while driving to the doctor's office, but he came up with nothing. Luckily, the holes on his thumb didn't seem to be changing too much. They'd grown a bit bigger and were more obvious to the eye now, but it wasn't that bad.
Right.
He got to the doctor's office and sat in his car for a second, trying to come up with any more answers.
Peter really couldn't think of anything else.
With a deep breath to calm his nerves, Peter walked into the doctor's office and signed in. He figured he'd have to wait a long time to see the doctor, but people had different plans. While in the waiting room at the doctor's office, Peter was getting a ridiculous amount of attention. At this point, the holes in his thumb were very plain to see, and everyone around him was shocked by what they were seeing. Peter didn't notice too much until the rest of the people's curiosity became increasingly obvious.
The other people in the office didn't try to hide their curiosity.
The few kids there wanted to go look, but their parents held them back. Still, it was as if everyone forgot why they were there with their own medical complaints.
Everybody wanted to know what was happening with him.
To be fair, so did Peter.
It was then that the doctor came out to call in the next patient. Everyone there collectively agreed that Peter should be seen first.
None of their problems were serious, but Peter's clearly was. Peter was a bit put off by this, but thanked them nonetheless. It was concerning, but surely he could wait.
The doctor didn't agree.
Once inside his office, the doctor was able to take a proper look at Peter's thumb, and he was shocked.
He had never seen anything like this. He would remember if he had.
Something like this wasn't something you just forgot.
And even more, the doctor hadn't even heard of anything like this in his medical books. He was clueless. The doctor knew that this was going to take some time.
He made a few calls to have his waiting patients sent to other doctors on call. Peter needed his attention the most, and he was going to make sure that they were going to find a cure for whatever was going on here. The doctor ordered tests for Peter, and while they waited for the results, he studied Peter's thumb intensely. The strange thing was that while earlier, Peter had felt some pain, he didn't anymore. His whole thumb was completely numb.
It didn't even hurt when the doctor pushed on it. This was a bad sign.
The doctor continued to investigate Peter's thumb, and when he got the first results back, he was disappointed.
The tests he'd ordered hadn't found anything yet.
There were still some others he could have done, but he needed Peter's permission.
It would take up a lot of Peter's time. What would he do?
Peter agreed to the tests, and while they waited for those results, the doctor, who still hadn't found anything helpful, posted a few pictures of Peter's thumb on a medical forum. He was hoping that some other doctor had seen something like this before. It would be a while before they got any response. Peter decided that he needed some air and went to use the bathroom. While he was gone, the doctor received a private message from the forum. He opened it eagerly, hoping that it was the answer he'd been seeking. And to his luck, it was. But it was also terrible, terrible news, and everything would have to change fast. Another doctor had indeed seen this condition before, and if they didn't do something soon, it could turn into a very big problem for everyone, including Peter. The doctor read the message again and again and knew that if this other doctor was right, that he needed to take quick action. Peter's doctor waited for the results, which came in almost immediately after he'd read the message from the forum. This was it. He had the results, and it chilled him to the bone. The other doctor had been right. Peter's doctor left his office, and soon the whole place was upside down. Peter returned from the bathroom. His thumb was not looking good. The holes were starting to spread to the rest of his hand. He was getting really scared now, but he knew he had to show the doctor. There was just one problem. The doctor wasn't in his office when Peter got back. What was he to do? Peter was just deciding what to do when he heard something happen behind him. The door he'd just come through had been locked from the outside. He had been trapped in here. And to make things even worse, he could hear the doctor telling others that he had called the police. What was happening? Peter begged for an explanation through the door, but no one was talking to him. All the nurses and doctors were frantically talking to each other, and nobody was answering his questions. All he was told was that he needed to stay calm until the police arrived. But this was good enough for Peter. Nervous and scared, the staff's reaction to his thumb was really starting to worry him. What was so wrong? Was he going to die? A million thoughts were running through his head. He tried to stay calm, but that was becoming impossible. Peter did not want to die soon enough. Those fears were turned into anger. Why was nobody talking to him? With no other idea, Peter began to kick at the door. He was desperate to get out. The doctors on the other side were yelling at him to stop, but Peter couldn't hear them over his own banging. He was determined to get out. After a few kicks, the door lock broke and the door swung wide open. The people on the other side started screaming, and Peter's doctor stood back. Peter stood there panting hard. It hadn't been easy to kick the door open, but he needed answers, and someone had to tell him what was going on right now. Peter's doctor ordered everyone else to get away and told Peter to stay back. He shouldn't get close to anyone right now. The fear on his doctor's face told Peter everything he needed to know about his fate, but Peter was determined. He told them that he wouldn't stay back unless they gave him answers. Before his doctor could speak, 3 armed officers came into the building and spotted Peter. The doctor pointed at Peter and started screaming at him. All 3 officers took out their pistols and aimed them carefully at Peter, who was feeling faint now. What the heck was going on? Peter quickly threw his hands up into the air as the police turned their attention to him. He almost had tears in his eyes, and he begged them all to just tell him what was going on. Seeing that the holes on Peter's thumb had taken up almost half of his hand now, the police told him to stay back. One of the officers calmly explained to Peter that they would tell him everything, but he needed to be isolated immediately. Peter agreed to the terms, but firmly told them that he wouldn't hesitate to break open another door to get answers. He was terrified, and no one was telling him anything. Peter went back into the doctor's office, and the door was closed after him. Peter could see the staff coming in with heavy cleaning materials, and they started cleaning everything: the floors, the walls, the door, you name it. Finally, the doctor came to the door to tell Peter what was going on. His doctor firstly apologized for not telling Peter what was happening. He'd been scared. It wasn't every day that a person with an awful flesh-eating virus came in, and he had to follow procedures that he'd never had to do before. He felt awful, but there was more. He discussed with Peter what he'd been doing the day before. Peter had taken a hike and then had gone on a date that night. Luckily for Peter, the bad date hadn't been the cause of all of this. Instead, it was more likely that he touched some infected plant while out on his hike. But which one? Peter wasn't sure what to tell them. He told the police and his doctor which route he'd taken and what he'd seen that might be helpful. He didn't know what else he could do. He was focused more on what the treatment plan was. Could they even treat him? Or would this virus eat his hand off? Luckily for Peter, the hospital had the medication they needed, but he'd have to be in isolation for a while. The police had gotten involved because they had needed to talk to Peter about his hike, but when they'd seen him out of the isolated room, they had panicked because his doctor had panicked. It was a big mess, but there was more. They also had to make sure that no one else would get infected. Peter was transported safely to a better hospital where he could be in isolation and get treatment for the virus eating his hand away. Fortunately, the medication paused the virus from spreading, and within a few days it started reversing the problem.
But what about the plant?
The officers had kept everyone off of the trail and after some heavy searching had found a plant that wasn't native to the area. It was tested and found to be the cause of Peter's problem.
It was uprooted and disposed of. There haven't been any cases since, and within a month Peter was completely better and ready to go on dates again. What did you think of this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like the video and subscribe. See you next time.